This story is about one adventurer who broke the ban. One aristocrat once mentioned in his memoirs that eating monsters should become a taboo for society. After all, eating a monster for a person means accepting their evil essence. The first stage, which begins immediately after absorption, is a feeling of euphoria that cannot be described in words, as well as a sharp surge in strength. The second stage is nausea coupled with headache, because these are signs of intoxication. Well, the third stage is sudden death. However, it is also still possible to become a monster yourself after absorbing an evil entity. But to make the story clearer to listeners, it's worth starting from the very beginning with the border town of Bologna. There was an area connected with several labyrinths, and among them there is one called the Poisonous Labyrinth. The air in it discourages any desire of the seekers to explore it. Other seekers hate this place, but our hero is a fairly frequent guest here, and because of this, he is nicknamed the non-frequency picker. The hero of the story is called Rudius, and right now, having gone into the caves, he was happy that today was also a good harvest. He was now on the 6th floor in a dungeon where not pure grass grew, which had healing effects, and he needed it, because it was his main source of income. Bending down, he began to collect this work with the thought that he would not take much because he only needed the bare minimum. When he finished filling his backpack, he began to go out with mice, saying that this would be enough for him for 3 whole days. However, suddenly his gaze was drawn to poisonous rats. Hostile creatures immediately began to attack our hero using poison because most of the local monsters use poison, adding to the list of reasons why adventurers avoid this place. However, such attacks do not work at all against our hero. He walked through the poisonous fog and didn't even notice anything, after which he approached the rats and cut them with his huge blade. However, one of them attacked him, but he managed to defend himself by raising his left hand. The rat continued to press, and his protective armor was already beginning to crack. But suddenly behind him he heard someone's voice. It was a magician who used a fireball and killed a rat with it, and also hit our hero a little. Rudius began to look around in surprise and noticed that 3 adventurers were standing next to him, and one of them said that he was sorry for missing a little. Their leader said that first they needed to get a little closer. Our hero immediately began to think about what he had seen these roses many times in the Adventurers Guild. The shortest guy walked up to Rudius and extended his hand, saying that it seemed to him that our hero was why he decided to come to the rescue. Rudius began to get up and say that he thanks you for your concern, but in the future he asks you to warn about this in advance. The guy said that he actually shouted that he was going to use a fireball. The fat man continued to walk around the dungeon and suddenly shouted that there was a whole grove of unclean grass and they could suddenly get rich quickly. Everyone immediately began to say with a smile that they were very lucky, but our hero looked at it all with a puzzled face. He asked them, did they deliberately follow him to discover his hotspot? The magician came close to Rudius and said that they were just adventurers who were investigating the territory and they accidentally stumbled upon our hero and also saved his skin. Rudius looked at them with hatred. They asked, is this guy really not even able to thank him properly for saving him? Rudius realized the situation he was in and bowed his head and apologized for disturbing these adventurers. After that, he returned to the restaurant where he lives. He tried to go to his room but ran into trouble in the form of 2 drunken adventurers who said that the mere presence of our hero would make even the food go sour and he needed to say everything, because he was not able to think with his stupid head. After that, a man with long white hair came close to our hero and said that looking for or adventures are actually people with abilities who are able to fight monsters. And someone like our hero with useless debuff cancellation shouldn't dare be called an adventurer because he's too weak. Cancellation of debuffs is the ability of our hero, and it helps him calmly explore all kinds of poisonous labyrinths, but does not give any advantage over monsters. Which is the basic point for an adventurer, because if you do not have combat skills, then no one will take you on the team. And Rudius is called an unclean goverger because he can only support someone's loot in low-ranking poisonous labyrinths, and in short, the skill turned out to be unsuccessful for him. After that, he left the bar with the thoughts that in the ranks of the adventurers he is complete trash, and he is actually already a grown man. But even a fight with a rat is like a fight with death for him. After that, he walked a little and returned to his bed, thinking that life at the bottom was the limit for him. The next morning, he went to the Adventurers Guild with the thought that he needed to find each other Poison Grove before the money ran out. However, when he came deeper, he looked around in surprise because today it was too busy in Suna for such a place. He went up to the girl at the reception and asked if Ali had any good errands delivered today. The girl greeted Rudius and said that a new labyrinth had recently been opened. Rudius seemed to have been electrocuted because the new labyrinth means that it is full of treasures and magical items. and this is a gold mine for an adventurer. He looked around the guild once again and realized that it was so noisy today for a reason. The girl also said that the unclean grass that he supplied them with had dropped in price from today. Rudius immediately got scared and grabbed the table, brought his face closer to this girl and asked why this was so. The girl covered her eyes, saying that she is needed by those who walk in the poisonous labyrinth. And from this day on, people will knock down a new one, so it will just fall on the grass. So the girl added that the new labyrinth is called the Avelio Mountains, but our hero is definitely not allowed there. Rudeus briefly asked why, and the girl stood up only saying that only rank D and above can get there, and Rudeus is class E and his qualifications are definitely not enough. Rudeus did not let up and said that he definitely wanted to get into the new labyrinth, and asked if there was at least some possibility, to which the girl replied that there are rules. There are rules. So that's what she is, and she is not going to give him permission because as soon as he gets there, then there he will die in vain. One guy heard the conversation between Rudius and the girl, and slowly approached them, saying that if he really wanted to get there, then he could join his team as a porter. A couple of hours later, Rudius and his new team were heading to a new labyrinth. The leader of this team was happy and said that they just needed a porter, and he was glad that he met Rudius, because they really needed a person who would collect materials from the new labyrinth since they could not find one. Rudius thought about it and decided that this could be because all the adventurers from the guild were already in this labyrinth, and this could well complicate the search for the porter. They continued to drive peacefully when suddenly the red-haired girl suddenly asked why the unclean picker was chosen from all possible options. The main ones immediately began to assent and say that this was a very bad choice, but the team leader asked them not to say that. After all, he had been working as an adventurer for quite a long time and would do anything better than the newcomers. The team leader approached our hero and said that he wanted to introduce himself again. He said that his name was Bayer, and he was the leader of the Scarlet Sword. After that, he said that the red-haired girl's name is Sasha and their tank's name is Rick, and they are all D rank. Our hero looked at them and said that his name is Rudius, and he has rank E, so he added that he would be sincerely glad to work with them. The leader of this team looked at his new porter and said that before they went, he would like to know a little more about him and asked to take a look at his guild ID. After that, Rudius took out his token and showed his characteristics. The team leader looked at them in surprise and asked if Rudius could really cast magic, to which Rude replied that these forces were definitely not enough for a fight, but they sometimes helped him out in dark alleys with cooking and the like. The team leader smiled and said that this was a rather useful skill, and he also said that he was counting on our hero on this journey. After another couple of hours, the whole team stood in front of the doors in delight and rejoiced that they had finally arrived in the newly made labyrinth of Avelio. Sasha said that everything looked as if they had arrived for the first time, and Rick begged to go inside as soon as possible. After all, he already wants to explore this place. But as soon as they entered inside, they saw that inside this labyrinth there was already a crowd of adventurers. Yes, she grabbed her head and said that this is a real curse because there are adventurers everywhere here, and this is real bad luck because they will get less. The team leader grabbed his head and said that it seemed that the initial floors had already been explored far and wide. Rick pointed his thumb down and said that then all they had to do was go deeper because there were probably a lot fewer people there. Rudius immediately inserted his words that this labyrinth is still poorly explored, and it is better to start with the map of the first floor and then move deeper. The partner was immediately attacked by the rest of the team who said that the porter had no right to vote. But that's why he was stuck at his rank because he was afraid to go deeper. The team leader looked at his guys and asked them to stop these stupid arguments because their porter didn't say anything bad. After that, the team leader looked at our hero and said that perhaps he might not be happy about this, but he agrees with his guys, and at this rate they definitely won't see any spoils. Therefore, we need to go down. With these thoughts, our heroes went down to the fourth floor. Immediately, they encountered quite strong resistance. Rudius was clearly uncomfortable, but the rest looked forward with confidence. After a couple of minutes, Rick looked at our hero and asked why he twitches from every small fry. Rudius, meanwhile, was thinking that his team is really strong, because they deal with these monsters so easily while he is not even able to move from fear. Sometime later, after several battles and also after several finds, Sasha said that it was a great idea to go down deeper, because fewer people means more oxygen. And the team leader said with a smile that the monsters here are not so strong and that they finally found the treasure, and this time did not return empty-handed. Rick looked at Rudius and ordered him to quickly collect loot from all the killed monsters. Rudeus, tired, said that he couldn't collect loot from everyone because their speed was too damaged, and he thought that there wasn't even a magic stone left there. Rick looked seriously at the porter and said that Sans is still there, so it's better for him not to shirk his work. He continued to skin the monsters and thought that all their guts were out and it smelled just awful, so he didn't understand why it was necessary to go so far. He used witchcraft with the thought that it would be better if he burned it a little. Rick, meanwhile, began to laugh and say that the old man decided to burn one of the monsters. And was he really going to eat him? However, Rick began scratching his head and talking about how they had been wandering around here for a long time, so he managed to get hungry. And in such a situation, it's no wonder he started staring at the monster's meat. Sasha looked at him and told him to stop these conversations because they are disgusting, and moreover, this is a taboo, and if they absorb the mana of monsters, then who knows what will happen to them. Rick said with a smile that it was all just jokes, and as soon as they returned, he would get drunk like crazy with the money raised. Suddenly, the atmosphere inside this room became tense, and a huge monster entered it. The whole team immediately looked at him in fear, thinking that this could not happen. In front of them stood a real huge minotaur, who looked at future victims with his evil red little eyes. Rudeus immediately remembered that this was a rank B monster, and began to ask himself what the brain was doing on such a simple floor, because it was simply impossible. All the team members immediately got scared and began to say that there was no way they could defeat this monster. The team leader immediately shouted for Rudeus to give him his backpack because they need to use the item from there. After that, the porter ran up to the team leader and handed over his backpack, and the leader, meanwhile, told them not to take their eyes off this monster. Rudeus looked straight into the eyes of this minotaur and asked what the plan was. The team leader swung his huge blade with a smile and said that they had a great plan. After that, he struck our hero on the back. Rudeus did not understand what happened and immediately fell to the ground with an incredible cry. Rick, meanwhile, charged his axe with a combat stimulus, which attracts the monster's attention to himself and threw it, leaving it near our hero. After that, the whole team used acceleration to quickly escape from here, and Rudeus looked at them and asked, did they really want to abandon him from the very beginning? The team leader said with a devilish smile that, of course, this was their plan, because who in their right mind would agree to team up with such a worthless hunter? After that, the whole team began to run away, leaving the porter to be torn to pieces by the minotaur. Rudeus rose to his knees with difficulty, and looking up he saw that standing in front of him was a huge minotaur who had already swung his axe. A moment later, the minotaur struck with his axe with all his might, but our hero managed to dodge. Rudeus looked at this minotaur with a smile and told him to bite it because he couldn't hit it. However, inside his hero there were thoughts that he would now be completely screwed. And immediately after that, the minotaur slammed Rudeus into the wall with all his strength. It was so strong that even the walls in this dungeon shook. The minotaur once again slammed Rudeus into the wall with all his strength and suddenly broke through it, and they both began to fall to the lower floors. After some time, our hero opened his eyes and was surprised to find that he was still alive, after which he looked back and noticed that most likely the carcass of the minotaur softened his fall. But his death is still only a matter of time, because even if he is lucky enough not to meet here other monsters, then he's still flying from which losses in any, yes, before he can recover. And besides, he's very hungry. Rudeus lay on his back with the thought that there must definitely be something here that he could wish for in order to recover. He began to stare at the body of a huge minotaur, but immediately began to discard these thoughts because he does not know what will happen if he tries to eat the monster. There was silence in his head for a couple of seconds, and the next thought was that he had lived an incredibly worthless life. Flashbacks began in his head about how in childhood, some man in armor said that no matter how painful and difficult it was, he should never give up. When Rudeus came to his senses, he was surprised to find that he was eating the body of this minotaur to restore his strength. Rudeus didn't care anymore. All he wanted was not to give up and get out of this dungeon. But if a person with a depleted supply of mana tries the meat of a monster, which is full of it, then particles of the monster's mana will just now enter his body and monsterization will begin. And this is a terrible fate, and it even worse than drinking a bottle of poison in one gulp. That's why it's taboo. But in order to make up for the blood loss and satisfy his hunger, Rudeus decided to take a risk and broke this taboo. Right now, he felt incredible euphoria, and his whole body seemed to become several times stronger. Inside, he was already thinking that he had caused an unexpected transformation on himself, and now he will forever be changed by remaining a monster in this cave. However, some time had passed and he still felt like a man. He had a terrible headache and was very nauseous, but he still continued to walk forward, holding his huge axe in one hand. Looking up, he saw that he was being attacked by flying rat monsters. As soon as he saw them, he instinctively used his new skill roar, which he inherited after standing the minotaur. This skill stuns and intimidates opponents. After that, He swung his axe a couple of times and cut into pieces the bats that surrounded him. Seeing that there were still a lot of monsters there, he also instinctively used a skill called Nature Fill, which temporarily increases the target's strength. He gained remarkable strength and continued to kill monsters one after another. When he dealt with all the bats, he picked up one of them from the floor and began to eat it. A skill called Echolocation immediately woke up in his head. Now, using this skill, he could detect living beings around, and also realized that this skill was effective even in complete darkness. However, as soon as he used echolocation, he noticed with horror that he was clearly not alone in this darkness, and in front of him was a huge mountain of monsters. He put his axe on his shoulders and asked, "Which of these monsters is eager to become his snack?" With new strength, Rudius entered into an unequal battle against the monsters and everything worked out great for him. He thought that this axe fits perfectly in his hand, and he also feels the energy of monsters without even looking at them. He ate a piece from every monster he killed, and every time he ate the body of a monster, his body was filled with incredible strength. After several hours of complete madness and an endless battle with monsters, he finally reached the doors and opening them slightly, began to walk into the sunlight. As soon as he stepped outside, he looked at the whole world in surprise. The axe fell from his hands and he wiped away his tears and said that he had finally gotten out of this hell. After that, he shouted no matter that he got out alive. The first thing he decided to do was go to the Adventurers Guild. The former team of Rudius stood there, and the main one said that after he listened and the report, he recalled all the seekers that were there from the labyrinth. The guild master said that Rudius was the only one who did not return, and he was with this team. The head of the team in which our hero was said that at the same moment they came across the Minotaur on the 4th level, he died, and they didn't even have a single chance to help this guy. The rest of the team also began to pretend that they were suffering very much and said that if only they could have noticed this earlier, then everything would have changed, and now Rudius was standing in front of them. The guildmaster listened to this story again and said that he understood the whole situation. After that, he looked at the girl at the reception and said that for now, they would impose a ban on entering this labyrinth. The girl did not react to this, but suddenly she jumped up and told everyone that Rudius had returned. Everyone looked around in surprise and saw our hero entering the guild door. They looked at the beaten guy and did not understand how this guy could remain alive after this maze. The head of the team in which Rudius was immediately approached our hero and said that he was very glad that he remained okay. After that, he hugged Rudius and said that if this guy blurts out anything, he will be killed immediately. The rest of the team also approached our hero and began to ask him if he was okay. They also said that they wanted to return for him, but the labyrinth was immediately closed after this incident. The team laughed and said that such a return should be celebrated in any case, and it would be the biggest feast. The team leader patted Rudius on the shoulder and said that this guy deserves a better place, suggesting that they head to another establishment. However, immediately the head of the guild realized that for some reason he could not even move a finger, and his whole body seemed to be filled with steel. Rudius looked up and looked into the eyes of the guildmaster, declaring that they were using him as bait. The team leader immediately approached Rudius and said that he was probably delusional. Meanwhile, the guildmaster also began to approach our hero and drop. "What does it mean used as bait?" Rudius looked at the master and said that the team took his rook and hit him in the back. He also added that Rick used his skill to focus the monster's attention on the porter. He also added that Sasha put acceleration on them so that the whole gang could escape and leave him to be torn to pieces. The team leader immediately went up to the master and started saying that this was all complete nonsense and they didn't do anything like that. But this guy was just lying. The guildmaster said that in any case they would establish the truth. And after that, a woman dressed like an archmage began to enter the room. The whole team looked at the seeker of truth with horror and asked what the truth seeker forgot here, because they almost never leave the capital. The guildmaster began to talk about the fact that the porters of this team began to die too often, so he took advantage of a long-standing commitment to call one of the seekers of truth here. The master asked the truth seeker to check Rudius and the leader of this team to find out which of them was telling the truth. The girl who was called the Seeker of Truth lowered her scarf and said that the members of the Scarlet Ball were pushing the guild. After that, she raised her staff up, giving its glow to the entire guild and added that Rudius told the truth. The team leader immediately started pointing his finger at this girl and said that she definitely couldn't know anything because she wasn't there. The guild master looked at him and said in a calm voice that the girl had the skill of truth. For those who do not know, it is almost impossible to develop this skill, and its effectiveness is combined with unique skills, and the one who has the skill of truth cannot be deceived because his words are more reliable than any oaths. The guildmaster said that such power serves their country faithfully. After that, he came close to the head of the team and said that abandoning his comrades in trouble is a taboo for adventurers. And not only did they intentionally injure him in order to divert the monster's attention to Rudius, but they also did this more than once, and therefore it is necessary to give their actions should be properly investigated and punished. The guildmaster continued to say that their qualifications would definitely be revoked, and they would become slaves. The team leader began to get angry and think that he was not at the table. Everything if he did not become a slave. And if there had not been a seeker of truth here, then everything would have gone just fine. After these thoughts, he swung his blade at the seeker of truth and tried to finish her off with one blow. However, Rudius at the last moment took out his blade and stood after this girl, protecting her from this attack. He looked his former leader in the eyes and demanded that he never dare touch the seeker of truth again. The team leader wanted to answer something, but immediately received a fist in the face, and he was thrown several meters. Everyone looked at the former loser in surprise while he said that this should not be done. After this incident, Rudius headed to the guest room of the Adventurers Guild, along with the guild master and the girl from the reception. The guild master looked at our hero and said that he was sorry for disturbing him because the guy was probably very tired. Rudius looked at the guild master and said that he did not care what would happen to him, because what would happen to his former team was much more important. The guild master began to say that everyone was tied up by guild employees and their case would be thoroughly investigated. The master also said that if their repeated atrocities are confirmed and it turns out that they supplied their porters, then the members of the Scarlet Ball will lose all their assets and status as adventurers and will also become slaves. However, the master added that the leader of this team swung too far at the seeker of truth, and most likely no one would ever see him again. The master bowed his head and said that one way or another they would lose all their rights to the loot in the new labyrinth. So our hero would need to take it. At the same time, with these words, the girl began to hold out the bag. Rudius opened it and was surprised to find that there were about 200,000 of local currency, which the guild master kindly asked to take away. As soon as our hero left the guest room, he hugged this bag with the thought that he would finally have enough to live on. He thought that you would definitely never accumulate such a sum with one grass spore in your life, but adventurers could make a lot of money. Rudius headed out and noticed that no one was even teasing him. After what they saw, they still didn't treat him better either. He left the building with thoughts that if it continues to arise, then his sudden return may also raise questions, so he believes that it would be best to return to the poisonous labyrinth. Looking up and taking a deep breath of fresh air, he decided that he needed to only head forward and not think about any dark thoughts. After all, he was finally able to earn a good fortune, so he can take care of his equipment and eat to his heart's content. As soon as he left the building, he began to walk across the square and think that first, he had better look into his equipment. Immediately, he saw a magic bag on the counter. The next day, Rudius, as if nothing had happened, headed into the poisonous labyrinth. He was attacked by poisonous rats, but he easily defeated them and was surprised to discover that he was now very strong, because just a couple of days ago, 5 of them would have chased him like a cockroach. After that, he stood and thought for a while and decided to use the assessment skill. He checked the rat and saw all its characteristics and skills. Rudius thought that he got such a rather useful skill by devouring a one-eyed monster, and with the help of this skill you can even evaluate corpses. Seeing that the rats were level 9, he was greatly surprised and decided that his own status should also have increased greatly. He picked up his token, thinking that if the rats were so light, then he must already be at least level 20. However, as soon as he opened his, he was surprised to find that he was already level 42. He couldn't believe his eyes because just yesterday he was at the 7th level. He joyfully looked at his level number and decided that he also needed to check his skills. As soon as he pressed the button for his skills, he was surprised to find that there were now more than 100 of them. After that, Rudius began to remember that when he passed where he fell in that new labyrinth, the wall that was supposed to be broken was intact. He also thought that the new labyrinth would remain closed for some time, so today he planned to surf only the poisonous labyrinth. But he really wanted to test his new powers and also find out how effective they were on the deeper floors. He also thought that he wanted to test his new acquisition, a magic bag. He approached the lower floors with the thought that now the most important thing is to choose the right monster for the first time. After that, he continued to descend deeper and deeper and was already on the 13th floor with the thoughts that these were no good, because for him, they were too simple, and he needed to go even deeper for the sake of worthy prey. With such thoughts, he descended all the way to the 24th floor. He was hiding in the shadows and looking at one of the reptilians. Having assessed him, he saw that he was level 25. He also found out that in front of him is a lizard warrior, and they usually fight in groups. But this one walks alone, and it's quite strange. However, this did not bother the guys at all. And after looking at his new equipment and new blade, he decided that he needed to try his hand at this guy. After that, he immediately rushed at this huge lizard. Closed, but the lizard noticed someone else's presence and was able to dodge by exposing his hand to the blow. Rudius said that this guy is not bad, so he probably also added that next time there will be no mistake. However, to his surprise, I began to run away as fast as I could. Rudius rushed to run after him, and after a couple of minutes, he happily noticed that now the lizard was at a dead end and he had nowhere to run. However, the lizard asked for something like a smile while he looked at our hero. Rudius immediately realized that this was an ambush, and looking around noticed several more huge lizards. He thought that he had been played like a sucker. And even with such a difference in levels, the situation was very bad, because there were so many of them. Having dodged the attack of one of the lizards, he decided that in this case it would be better if he fought with them one-on-one in turn. He immediately attacked one of the lizards and, raising his hand, shouted that he was about to die. I just tried to block our hero's blow, but I couldn't do it and fell on my back. After that, the lizard opened its eyes and noticed that Rudius had already swung his son to cut off this monster. However, another lizard immediately appeared and saved his brother. And behind him, the third lizard tried to attack. Rudius noticed this in time and dodged and escaped with a blow. Getting up, he placed his blade on his shoulder and smiled, and said that it was quite close, and he praises these lizards for their coordinated work. However, as soon as he used the echolocation skill, he noticed that several more lizards had appeared and said that this was already too much. Rudius thought that even if these monsters work very well together, then using tactics such as luring in conjunction with coordinating an attack is already too much. He fought off their blows and thought that before falling into this trap, he heard some kind of high-frequency sound, and perhaps it was a call. Looking through the crowd, he saw a lizard that was different from the rest. This monster stood quietly and folded its arms on its chest, looking at everything that was happening. He used the assessment and found out that it was a lizard commander with a 32nd level, and one of his skills was command. Rudius looked straight into the eyes of this monster with the thought that most likely this was their boss, and if he was killed, then everyone else would immediately lose. The red lizard immediately realized that things were going badly and let out a deafening howl, alerting its soldiers to the danger. The rest of the lizards immediately rose into the water and swung their blades to finish off our hero with one blow. Rudius, noticing this, immediately used a minotaur skill called a Surge of Strength, and his body was filled with rage in that very brawl. And he was able to break through the crowd of these lizards with one swing of his blade. After that, he pushed off from one of the lizards and jumped up and attacked the commander of these lizards. A moment later, Rudius launched a powerful punch straight at that lizard. However, I was surprised to find that his blade did not even scratch this boss. The lizard commander, meanwhile, swung his blade at our hero, and Rudius noticed that he was in a losing position because he could not leave here. However, he only smiled after these thoughts because he knew that he could use the impenetrability skill that he received from the huge spider. Boss Lizard tried to break through our hero, but nothing worked, and Rudius noted with a smile that not only this lizard has tricks. The huge lizard realized that his opponent was quite serious and immediately retreated a little back. After that, Rudius decided to take advantage of the situation and find out what was wrong because he felt that he was causing damage. Well, there is not a single scratch on this monster. He analyzed the monster and noticed that it didn't even have a skill that could increase resistance. And perhaps someone else was involved. He began to check the rest of the lizards. Jesus does not see any similar skill among them. However, after a couple of seconds, he discovered a lizard that was hiding among his brothers, and saw that he had the substitution skill, and this monster could take other people's damage upon itself. As soon as Rudius noticed this, he attacked this guy and immediately killed him. While Rudius was striking, he said that it was probably hard for the lizard to be the one on whom other people's cones fell. The boss lizard immediately screamed when he saw that his friend had been killed, and, together with his gang, attacked our hero. However, Rudius used the web control skill and climbed up, catching on the web. After that, he took several more children out of his hands and said that now that these guys were crowded together, it would be much easier for him to deal with them all at the same time. He immobilized them with his web, and now absolutely the entire team, together with their leader, lay on the ground, unable to move. Rudius looked into the eyes of the huge lizard, who controlled this whole gang, and said that they had lost. Immediately after these words, he took out his blade and cut off the head of this boss. As soon as Rudius finished cutting up the rest of the monsters, he looked at everything that was left of them with a smile and wished himself bon appetit. After that, He opened your magic bag with the thought that it was not in vain that he bought it with the money he received from the guild, and it was time to look at it in action. He took out a blade from it and was glad that the bag was really magic, and its capacity was artificially increased by magic, and the weight of this bag did not change. He immediately began to take out kitchen utensils and all sorts of spices from this bag in order to cook the monster meat more deliciously. He began to cut his tail. I once again thought that then on the lower floors he was in despair and needed any food. And now he no longer feels such an urgent need to eat raw flesh. Therefore, he would really like to try to cook it deliciously. He also decided that this was an excellent opportunity to find out whether monster meat could actually be tasty. As soon as he finally finished cooking, he sat down with a willing face near the finished boner. I reasoned that monster meat could really at least look like, because if it is cooked correctly. After that, he pierced a piece of the flock with his dagger and immediately bit it off. After that, his face broke into a smile, and he briefly said under his breath that this was simply incredibly delicious. He continued to gobble up all the food in the sense that no one could even think that monster meat could really be so tasty, and at this rate he would definitely get hooked soon. Meanwhile, his token was replenished with new skills such as poison resistance, shield control, one-handed ball control, and command. The guy continued to devour monster meat and think why it is so cool, and is it really because of the energy that monster meat is full of? After chewing another piece, he thought about the fact that the skills of that brother, the armored spider, and the evil class were very useful. And of the monsters and skills he has not yet used, only the Thunderwolf and the Black Asp remain, and he will deal with this issue in the near future. As soon as our hero finished everything, he immediately got up with the thought that on the way back, he must arrange for you an assortment of monsters. After that, Rudius got up and began to look for me yesterday with the substitution skill so that he could also eat him. As soon as he completely finished his meal, he climbed to the 21st floor of the poisonous labyrinth. Here the monsters were not particularly serious and they were mostly slugs and all sorts of flying wasps. Rudius thought that it would be an excellent opportunity to use the skills of the Thunderwolf on them, and immediately after that, his eyes lit up and he created the skill Shroud of Lightning from his hand, instantly finishing off a group of monsters. Looking at his left hand, he happily noticed that this was also a very useful skill, and it seemed that they were monsters specializing in status debuffs, but they attacked the wrong one. Looking at all those whom he had just killed, he immediately took out an ordinary frying pan from his magic bag and said that for lunch he would have frog legs breaded with butterfly wings. And after about an hour, this dish was finally ready. With incredible appetite, he began to absorb everything he had just prepared and thought that because of the spices it was incredibly tasty, and also reasoned that he did not have enough beer on his. But they immediately appeared new skills such as poison, temperature regulation, poisonous pollen, paralysis, and air slash. While he continued to eat this food, he suddenly looked back and noticed that behind him there were some sounds of a crash and a human voice. He thought with a smile, is he not the only adventurer who decided to climb so far? After that, he thanked the killed monsters for the food and put all his supplies back into the magic bag. After that, he immediately rushed to someone's screams with the thought that this was a very rare chance to watch others in battle, and if he was lucky, he could learn something new. Meanwhile, not far from Rudius, there was a group of adventurers. Their captain stood there, and in his hand was a bloody blade, and at his feet lay the girl whom he had just wounded. The girl covered her wounds and looked in horror at the blade that was now near her feet. And the rest, meanwhile, parodied her screams and said that they could not believe that there was still a lot of mana left in her. The captain of this group said that it was worth sweating next to this girl. After that, he approached the weakened woman and took off her hood with the words that the elven girl was still worth such efforts. The rest of the scoundrels began to smile and talk about how much they would be given for such loot. Well, suddenly their conversation was interrupted by Rudius, who said with disappointment that he was hoping to make friends among the adventurers but came across these freaks. He came out of the shadows and turned to these guys with the words that he didn't know what was going on here, but he couldn't get past the girl who was being attacked by the crowd. Therefore, he would be obliged to intercede for her. The captain of the bandits looked at our hero and asked who he even was. Rudius smiled proudly and stated that he was an adventurer, but did not say what his rank was. The elf looked at our hero and ordered him to leave as quickly as possible because these are headhunters. Rudius remembered that he had already heard about bounty hunters and they should all be of fairly high rank, so he immediately used his assessment skill. He first decided to check the main one and was surprised to discover that he had a full 65th level, and he also noticed that his statistics were hidden and he could not see them. After that, He decided to check the assessment of everyone else and noticed that they all had a level above 50 and all their skills were hidden. He continued to look at them and thought that these guys had something like a hiding skill or even a magic blocker. So he was clearly stuck with a problem considering that he also had a huge level. And the captain of the bandits, looking at our hero for a couple of seconds, briefly ordered his subordinates to quickly kill this guy in order to get rid of witnesses in this cave. They immediately attacked our hero, and Rudius noted with fear that his opponent was quite fast. However, Rudius was dexterous enough to take out his blade and block this blow so as not to immediately end up as a corpse. The bandit who attacked Rudius looked into his eyes and said that the guy was pretty good, to which our hero joked that the enemy in front of him was simply weak. The bounty hunter immediately put in even more effort, creating some discomfort for Rudius. Rudius understood that he would clearly lose in physical strength to this guy and used his poison skills to throw it in this guy's face. The bandit immediately grabbed his melted face and shouted with an incredible scream that he hated Rudius. The others looked at our hero in surprise because for the first time in their lives they saw a person who could spit poison, and they also began to worry about their friend. The headhunter captain silently looked at Rudius, and thoughts were spinning in his head that this guy was emanating energy like a monster. Rudius X, meanwhile, looked at the guy whose face had just melted and thought that this was a rather reckless fighting style that was completely unsuitable for an adventurer. But in this case, he would help a weakling like him. The head of the headhunters, meanwhile, analyzed what he had just seen and concluded that this guy has a unique skill. It is poison, and it clearly should not be underestimated because it can leave burns for life. He looked at the rest of his people and said that now they should attack all three of them at once and instantly kill this guy because he could create huge problems. The assistants of the head of the bounty hunters immediately pounced on our hero, and Rudius dodged at the last second with the thought that if he stopped for even a second, he would clearly be a plus, and in this battle he definitely had to give his all. However, just when he thought that he was able to avoid the blow by crouching, he noticed that another headhunter had already swung his leg and was preparing to attack. It was a very emergency situation and Rudius was confused, but immediately came to his senses and decided to use the impenetrable skill to protect himself from this blow. The next moment, the head of the headhunters delivered an incredibly strong blow directly to our hero's skull with his foot. He threw Rudius and his sword into the swamp. The head of the headhunters looked at all this and thought that this guy was quite strong, because even a strong hunter could break his back from such a blow. The rest of the bandits immediately began to say that now our hero would say goodbye to his life, and as soon as Rudius got to his feet he began to run away. The others looked at this in surprise and did not ask where he ran. The bounty hunters rushed after this guy, but the head stopped them, saying that this was a poisonous swamp and if they went deeper, they would not be able to return back. After that, the head of the bounty hunters said that this guy who is now inside the lake will also have a hard time in this poison, and soon he will come out and ask him to kill him so cute. Some time passed and the headhunters were already pretty tired and asked each other how long this guy was going to stick around in the poisonous swamp and already began to talk about how to quickly get in there and finish the job as an adventurer should. Rudius, meanwhile, was thinking that he was very lucky that it was nearby. It turned out that this was a broken swamp, because in addition to the poison itself, the poisonous fumes from the swamp also significantly reduced the agility of the adventurers. The headhunters were clearly not happy with the fact that they had inhaled these fumes and were discussing how long this freak could be sitting in this swamp. Had he really taken root there? The second hunter said that this guy had been sour there for about 10 minutes and they all even had ears. My head hurt. Rudius continued to wait, but after these words he decided that it was time for him to sunset. He thought that he would like to weaken them a little more, but if he changes, the elf's wounds will only get worse. The girl, meanwhile, was also clearly not happy with the fact that she had to breathe toxic fumes and was already losing consciousness. Rudius began to walk out of the swamp with a confident step and asked the headhunters how they were feeling, because the double damage from the evaporation and poison of the swamp should be quite significant. The bounty hunters turned a deaf ear to his words and were glad that he had finally decided to give up, instead of saying with a smile that this guy had caused them a lot of trouble. But now they would kill him and finally get out of this stinking dungeon. But as soon as our hero came out of this poisonous swamp, he said that he didn't care about it at all because debuffs did not affect him. And he also added that he had no idea how others felt in such conditions. The head of the headhunters immediately became angry and could not believe his ears. After all, if this guy has resistance to such poisons, then he fooled them, and now he is in an advantageous position. The head of the hunters pointed his finger at our hero and ordered everyone else to quickly finish him off. The weakened headhunters immediately rushed at our hero, but he defended himself from their blows with a smile. After this, he began to clearly dominate the battle and said that the poison of the swamp clearly depleted their stamina, and the accumulated poison in his lungs lowered his statistical indicators. However, the second hunter swung his blade in the hope of quickly cutting off our hero's head. But Rudeus didn't even move and simply used the impenetrability skill because this would definitely be enough to deal with the weakened blow of the headhunter who inhaled nearby. Rudeus then used Shroud of Lightning and simultaneously hit the two with a strong blast of electricity. The first hunter was already clearly dead or at least immobilized after such a discharge of electricity. And the second one was all smoking and said that our hero would not get away with this so easily. He raised his blade and rushed at Rudeus, but immediately his entire body was cut open by such an aerial cutting skill. The head of the hunters watched in surprise everything that was happening and thought that this guy had impenetrable poison, lightning shroud, and even air cuts. And this is all too strange. He couldn't understand how this man could have so many abilities of different monsters at the same time. Rudeus looked at the head of the hunters and began to approach him. In his eyes, he read that this guy was thinking about different skills and, answering in advance, Rudeus said that everyone does not need to know where he got all these skills from. They entered into a one-on-one battle, and the head of the headhunters thought that although he has an absolute advantage in fights with people, but because of all this poison, he is now clearly weaker and seems to lose. After a couple of minutes of a fierce duel, the head of the hunters decided to go all in and use the agility charm on his body, shouting that there was no way in his life he would lose to such a non-entity like Rudeus. However, as soon as the head of the hunters used the agility enchantment on his body, Rudeus immediately used a minotaur skill called a Surge of Strength and, charging his body with energy, rushed at his enemy. Their swords collided with each other, and the blade of the head of the hunters immediately crumbled, and the man watched in surprise as his life collapsed. A couple of moments later, Rudeus stood next to the head of the headhunters whom he had just cut into pieces and said that if this guy did not have debuffs, he would clearly win this fight. After this battle, Rudeus helped the elf girl get herself in order and raised her to her feet. They began to leave this dungeon. And the girl thanked him for saving her. Please don't know what would have happened to her if he hadn't been there. No matter what, our hero answered briefly that he simply could not leave a lonely girl there. Meanwhile, inside, he thought that the girl was clearly lying and simply did not mean that this poison had damaged her very badly. However, he calmed himself with the thoughts that he gave her first aid as best he could. They continued to walk forward in silence, and he remembered this fight and thought that, among other things, it was quite unusual to meet an elf in such a wilderness, and he wondered what happened to her that she was forced to run from the headhunters, but he still did not dare to ask. They still continued to peacefully walk towards the exit, but suddenly stopped because a huge boss butterfly appeared right in front of them. Rudeus scanned him with his skill and found out that this moth is a boss and he has level 37. And there are also several skills that Rudeus does not yet possess. He immediately took out his blade and attacked this huge boss, thinking that his size gave him absolutely no advantage. The moth saw that they were trying to attack him and immediately used an air slash towards our hero. This air cut was clearly stronger than that of ordinary moths, and our hero barely dodged such a blow. The elf was also almost hit, and she dodged at the last second. Rudeus looked at the girl and asked if she was okay, to which the girl briefly replied that she was fine. Rudeus turned his gaze to the boss and said that this monster had blown him up, scared him, and now he would get the first number. The man began to look at this huge boss and say that if he can fly, that does not mean that it is impossible to get him from the earth. He used his air slash skill and attacked the boss with 3 folders of his wings. The moth was clearly angry and used its paralyzing pollen skill to dissolve it throughout the area. Rudeus just smiled after that and said that it would never work on him. However, he immediately remembered that he was not alone here and rushed to help the girl who had just been paralyzed by what? However, she looked like she didn't need any help and used her attack to hit the moth. Rudeus noticed that she used wind magic and decided that this was not very surprising because she was an elf. After that, he pounced on Boss Moth and immediately pierced his skull with his blade. They stood over the defeated body of this monster, and the girl asked our hero, "Is it really not poison or paralysis that affects him?" So the girl said that she noticed that this man had all the skills like the local monsters. Rudeus looked away and began to think about how to explain everything to her so that she would understand everything. Suddenly, the elf fell to her knees and Rudeus asked her, "Did we find out that the paralyzing scales hit the girl?" The elf looked up and said that this was clearly something else. Rudeus sat down next to her, and the girl asked him to get out of here as quickly as possible, and only then would she tell him everything when they were in the fresh air. After about another hour, they were finally sitting in the open air, and the girl said that she felt much easier outside. She looked at our hero and said that before she begins to describe the situation, she wanted to introduce herself first. The girl looked into our hero's eyes and said that her name was Ellie, and she was an adventurer. Rudius looked at you narrow in surprise and asked, "Is she really the same Ellie Emerald Wind?" To which the girl laughed and asked, "Has he heard of her before?" Rudius replied that of course he heard, because she is from an S-rank team from the kingdom of Ludius called Azure Plume, and absolutely every adventurer knows this team. However, he began to say that if he remembers correctly, then this team no longer exists. The elf looked down and said that it was so, and 5 years ago the monsters crushed them, because on that day, they went to battle against the monsters of the deepest levels of the S-rank labyrinth called the Labyrinth of the Abyss. And in that battle, their leader died. Another member of their team resigned due to injuries received, and another one was swallowed up by the labyrinth itself. The girl said that this was not the end and began to expose herself, saying that she too could not get away with it. Rudeus noticed that she was taking off her outerwear and asked what she was doing. The girl exposed her breasts a little and showed him the mark, saying that this is a curse that has been on her since then, and this curse lowers her level. Rudius looked at this scar and said that he had never heard of curses that could reduce the level before. The elf sadly said that she also did not know about it before. She continued her story about how she tried to lift the curse in a variety of ways, but all she managed to do was slow down its progression. The girl said that those same headhunters knew very well about this curse because they wanted easy money. Ellie squeezed and said that she would die anyway as soon as the level went below 0. But she could not bear to be in the power of such people. Rudeus was silent for a couple of seconds and looked her straight in the eyes, saying that this was an ordinary curse and it seemed that he could even help remove it. After that, he took out his token and looked at the substitution skill, the power of which is that it allows you to take on the wounds and debuffs received by the selected target. The guy looked at the girl again and said that they could try something. Then he told her not to resist the skill he was currently using. The girl bowed her head and said that she had nothing better to lose anyway, so she agreed to such an adventure. Immediately after that, our hero took her by the shoulders and used the substitution skill. The scar on the girl's chest began to go away, and she looked at it in surprise and thought that her curse was now passing on to this guy. She immediately began to twitch and say that this was a terrible idea, and in this case, the curse would simply pass on to him at this rate. Rudius smiled and asked her to trust, saying that there was nothing wrong with it. As soon as the curse was completely inside our hero's body, he activated a unique skill with which he was born, which is called canceling debuffs, and the curse was immediately destroyed. Rudeus looked at his hand and was glad that it worked. The elf looked at our hero and asked him what had just happened, but he didn't answer anything and asked the girl to check her status. The girl immediately opened her token and saw that her status was now completely normal. She blushed and began to stammer. She clearly wanted to say something, but nothing worked for her. Then she began to cry and said that it could not be so that the curse would be lifted. Rudeus, meanwhile, looked at the girl and said that his unique skill is canceling debuffs. So he thought that this should also work against the curse, and he was very glad that it worked out for him. The elf looked down, unable to say anything, but after a couple of seconds she asked our hero, "Is he really a fool? Because he risked a lot for the sake of the first person he met." However, after that, she raised her head and with teary eyes said that she was very grateful to him in any case and was glad that it worked. Rudeus hugged the girl and pressed her to him, saying that he was also glad that everything worked out for him. Immediately after this, Rudeus and the elf went to the bar to celebrate such a wonderful occasion. Ellie said with a smile that it was very cheap here, but at the same time the beer was still delicious. She was silent for a while and said that the guy who was sitting with her knew a lot about choosing places. Rudeus raised his finger up, and inside he was thinking about going to one of the places and where he wanted to go. They weren't even allowed in because they looked terrible. After that, he looked at the happy elf who was drinking her 10th glass of beer in a row and asked if everything would be okay with her because she drinks a lot, and just a couple of hours ago she was seriously injured. The girl looked at Rudeus and briefly replied that she was recovering. And in general, today is a very wonderful day. Therefore, it would be impudent not to drink. Rudeus smiled and they clinked their glasses. He took a couple of sips and asked the girl what she intended to do next. But after the girl answered him, he froze in place because she said that, to be honest, she would like to know a little more about Rudeus. The elf propped her face with her hand and blushed a little, asking how he decided to become an adventurer. Rudeus began to talk about how, a long time ago, the village in which he lived was attacked by monsters. And because of these monsters, he lost his entire family and also all his friends, and in the end, he was left completely alone. But suddenly, an S-rank adventurer appeared on the scene. This adventurer saved little Rudius. Rudius recalled this with the words that he would never forget this majestic appearance at that moment. He continued to say that from then on, he began to dream of becoming the same one day in order to also save people. After this, the man looked at the bottom of his beer mug and replied that this was his goal. The elf smiled and said that this was an excellent goal. Rudeus looked at her in surprise and asked if she wouldn't even laugh. To which the girl replied that she herself dreamed of seeking adventures of the maximum rank and even higher. She winked and said that she planned to become even stronger until she was cursed, and she is sure that her companions are still somewhere out there in the depths of the abyss labyrinth, and someday whatever the result, she wants to try what the monster dictated again. After that, the girl drank a little more beer and said that now they don't have much strength to achieve their goals, so she suggests uniting into one team. The girl extended her hand to shake Rudeus's as a sign that they would now be together, but he began to come up with some excuses. But suddenly, while he mumbled, someone grabbed the elf by the hand. It was one of the bullies who said that next to the loser, there was a very cute girl. After that, the bullies surrounded the elf and asked her to keep them company. After all, they are much better than this boar with whom she's now sitting. Rudius immediately stood up and took the most important person by the shoulder and told him to quickly get out of here. The man immediately grabbed our hero by the clothes and called him a piece of shit. Ellie noticed that a conflict was brewing and immediately stood up shouting for both of them to stop immediately. She said with a smile that they were now inside the tavern, and if they wanted to fight, they should go outside or decide everything like men. Being a man in her head meant competing to see who could outdrink whom. Immediately after this, there was a noise in the tavern and everyone began to compete with her in this matter. The beer mugs emptied one after another, and the bartender did not have time to pour new ones. After a couple of hours, those who remained on their feet noticed with a smile that Ellie was winning. Rudius and Ellie went to the wall, and the guys said that she held up well for someone who had drunk several glasses before the competition. The girl just smiled. After that, she pressed herself close to our hero and replied that he was her benefactor after all, so she had to intercede. She couldn't just sit and watch from the sidelines. Immediately after these words, she could no longer stand on her feet and fell into the arms of our hero. He looked at her with a smile and stroked her head, saying that there's definitely nothing that can be done about it and she needs to sleep it off. However, he has a better idea. He used the substitution skill, and the girl immediately turned out to be completely sober, after which he said that he had reset her hangover out of sadness and noticed that he couldn't get drunk himself. The happy girl took him by the hands and said that she was very glad that first he dealt with her archives, and now he also had a hangover, and he just had incredibly wonderful skills, so they should definitely form a team. As soon as she said this, she confidently walked towards her new friends and said that they could continue drinking, to which our hero asked her to drink at least in moderation. The girl walked to the bar and noticed that today the special dish was smoked barnama. She said that she was very sorry that they could not try their special dish. The bartender sadly said that the place where this fish was caught was occupied by some creatures. The bartender also said that he sent the guild by the hair. But most of the adventurers are already at work and no one is responding. He looked at our heroes and invited them to be the ones who would help solve this problem, saying that the work would not be dusty at all. The next day, they immediately headed to the fishing grounds for catching barnama. The elf happily said that they would get rid of this monster and taste a special dish in that restaurant. And Rudius, with a happy face, said that he was just waiting for this moment. However, when they swam a little further, someone shot at them from the water, since our hero already had a fairly high level and was able to dodge this blow. Down in Moscow, our hero noticed a huge fish and said that it was the tavern owner who sent them for this creature. Ellie stopped and asked Rudius to look at the other creatures. Rudius analyzed all these fish and noted that they all have about the 20th level, and also have mediocre skills, but the problem is that there are a lot of them, so it's difficult to fight off every underwater spike. Rudeus continued to dodge and defend himself from these shots, but in his head there were thoughts that continuing to stand still was not an option at all. And in this case, you need to act decisively. Immediately after these words, he jumped into the water. Elfika looked at him in surprise and asked, "Did he really drink away all his brains yesterday?" However, as soon as our hero was underwater, he looked at all these fish with a smile and said that they could attack him in turn and he would definitely deal with each of them. The emotions of the fish immediately attacked our hero. But with a smile, he used the Shroud of Lightning and at the same time destroyed an entire flock. After this, the killed fish floated up belly up. And with them our hero who had problems swimming. Having caught his breath a little, he told the elf to stay inside the boat because there were still creatures here that needed to be dealt with. but for some reason they were at depth and did not attack. Perhaps they were looking for a moment or were defending something. Rudius raised his hand up so that the elf would pay attention to him and said that he needed to dive deeper to find out what was happening here. And also, if she didn't mind, he asked her to do one thing. Ellie listened to his request in surprise but agreed anyway. After that, Rudius went down to the bottom on a thread and began to examine the fish that did not attack him. He began to think about the fact that he immediately realized that they were protecting something because, despite the fact that he had already sailed almost close to them, they still did not attack him and did not even run away. And this means only one thing. When he was deep enough, he noticed a huge crab with tentacles sticking out of its back. He analyzed it and found out that it was level 38. He looked at this monster in surprise and said to himself that this was an incredibly huge sea anemone. Or maybe it was just a hermit who had mutated very much. As soon as the hermit crab noticed our hero, he tore off a piece of his paw and threw it at our hero. His claw immediately turned into a fish, and Rudius finally understood who was paying all these fish that surrounded him. And he also realized that if you don't kill the main one, then getting rid of all these small fish will be useless, and it seems that this crab does not intend to attack anyone. So, first of all, it's better to prepare while he has time. However, as soon as Rudius thought that the crab was peaceful, this monster immediately grabbed him with one of its tentacles. Rudius realized that this boss and the other fish didn't attack him right away just to make him lower his guard. He decided that he couldn't waste time and used something with lightning to shock them. However, he was surprised to notice that despite the direct contact with his skin, his body remained intact. However, after a moment, he realized that this crab had cut off its own tentacles. Rudius remembered that this crab has the autonomy skill, and he simply threw away his tentacles as soon as they were struck by lightning, and this allowed him to avoid all the damage. Immediately after that, he looked up and saw this huge crab rushing towards him. Rudius, in a panic, thought that he was already beginning to choke and was clearly unable to continue this fight. After that, he pulled his rope with the thought that he was counting on his teammate. As soon as the girl noticed that the rope was starting to twitch, she used air slashes to attack what was underwater. And at the same time, due to the laws of physics, our hero was pulled back up. As soon as Rudius was on the surface, he began to cough out air from his lungs. And the girl who was sitting next to him asked if everything was okay. Rudius scratched his head and thanked the girl for saving her, saying closed that under the water there is a boss who endlessly pays these fish and he also regenerates like crazy, so they need to quickly return to the bottom to defeat him. The girl sadly said that underwater monsters have too great an advantage underwater. She also added that her magic would not reach there, so some kind of plan was needed. Rudius replied that there is one way, but he needs to decide on something. He immediately remembered how the girl told him about her curse and even offered to become a team, so he too should open up to her before it's too late. After that, he turned away from her and walked up to the fish that had been thrown ashore. The girl looked at him in surprise, and the guy told her not to tell anyone anything about what she was about to see. A couple of minutes later, our hero already had underwater breathing and high-speed swimming, and was heading at full speed for the second round with this boss. Now it was not a problem for him to move underwater, and he easily dealt with a horde of fish with his bare hands. Also, it was no longer difficult for him to get close to this sunset crab and inflict several serious wounds on it. After he pierced several of his hearts, he smiled and said that it was time for the monster to disappear. And now, he can communicate underwater. As soon as Rudius finished off this monster, he thought that now the fishing grounds should return to normal. But there is a problem in the face of the elf. He thought that the girl saw how he devoured the monster, and he wondered how she reacted to this and what she would say when he returned. As soon as he swam ashore, he was surprised to find that the girl was nowhere to be found. Rudius just smiled and asked himself why he thought that the girl would wait for him, because he only hoped in vain. However, he immediately heard her voice and the girl asked why he was there for so long, but immediately said that it was very good that at least he was not injured. After that, she was silent for a while and asked how the duel with the boss went. Rudius briefly replied that he had defeated him, and the girl replied with a smile that she could not sit while she was waiting for him. So she decided to gather brushwood for the fire because now he needed to dry his clothes. Rudius looked at the elf and asked if she really didn't mind what she recently saw. The girl began to make a fire, saying that she was a little surprised by this. However, he trusted her to reveal this secret, and for her, this means more than anything else. Rudius replied that he understood everything and put down his sword, thanking her for her understanding. After that, he used a rope to get the boss's body and said that he would like to get the skills of this monster. So he cut himself a piece from his body and thought that it would be strange to eat alone. Therefore, he decided to get Barnuma together with this boss. He took the fish by the mouth with a smile, saying that if the girl doesn't mind sharing lunch with the monster, then they can have dinner. This didn't happen to Ellie at all. And with happy eyes, she said that she would be happy to keep company, and they both laughed. It was already sunset and the food was finally ready, but they continued and continued talking, and even discussed the time he first tried monster meat. Ellie continued to gobble up this fish and say that it was incredibly delicious. She also said that this is the first time she has seen a person who eats monsters, and it is really surprising. But she said that he had good reasons for this. Rudius confirmed her words and said with a smile that thanks to this, a weakling like him doomed to the lowest rank was one step closer to his dream. The girl said that she understood everything and also added that this guy's power was used to help her with the curse and the bounty hunters, so probably when it's cooked, the monster meat should even be tasty and capable of doing such good deeds in this guy's body. Rudeus smiled and said that monster meat actually tastes amazing. He also said that he had already received all the necessary skills, so he no longer needed this meat, but he wanted to try the prepared version and asked the girl if she wanted to try. To which the elf smiled and said that, unfortunately, there is no guarantee that she will survive it, so she is the best will abstain. After finishing the meal, the girl said that she wanted to ask Rudius something. Ellie looked him straight in the eyes and asked if they would be one team. Rudius chewed a piece of meat and asked if she had any other useful connections with the adventurers. The girl looked down and replied that she had lived for 5 whole years with this curse. And those who had not yet died in the labyrinths had already retired, and human years greatly limited her. She also looked at the fire and added that the seekers who rush into the labyrinths are mostly crazy, and no matter how strong they are, she cannot trust them with her back. The girl said that to create a team, you need someone who can be trusted with both your back and your innermost thoughts. After these words, she extended her palm to Rudius and smiled softly, saying that she could trust this person with both at the same time. Rudius threw away his plates and said that in that case, from now on they will be a team. After which he stood up, laughed, and shook her hand. The next day, they went to the Adventurers Guild in Boulogne. They headed off with a smile, and the girl said that today they would get ready for their first real work as a team. Rudius looked at the notice board and said that since he had such a low rank, he shouldn't expect many requests. The girl said that all this was not important and that this would be enough for them for the first time. After that, she approached the girl at the reception and handed over her badge, saying that she was now on the same team with this guy and asked them to register. As soon as the girl picked up the elf token A, she was surprised to notice that standing in front of her was the adventurer of the highest rank, Ellie Emerald Wind. The girl who works in the guild looked at the elf and asked why she needed the weakest member of their guild on her team. Ellie looked at this girl menacingly and she immediately apologized, saying that she understood everything. So now they will be registered in the same team. Ellie was silent for a while and said that her friend also needs to be promoted right away and asked what he lacks for a promotion. The girl picked up the documents to check and said that this guy actually has enough achievements and all that remains is to pass the combat test. Ellie smiled and said that in this case they need requests for clearing of the highest level. Our hero was immediately told that now they can go to the vicinity of this city to destroy a pack of gray wolves. On the same day, they went on this mission and Rudius used his stealth skill, which he received from the spider, to unexpectedly attack these wolves. The wolves had a rather strong sense of smell, and they sensed it at the very last moment. But it was too late, and they were all immediately dead. Before his death, one of the wolves was able to let out a howl to call the rest of his friends, and they immediately surrounded our heroes. Rudius smiled and said that he was leaving reinforcements for his teammate. The girl cast a spell and summoned the fairy, and then they greeted each other, and the elf asked to lend her strength to this girl. Rudeus looked at how this girl mastered spirit magic, and was surprised that he now saw such a beautiful, unique skill. After the spirit transferred its power to its owner, the elf immediately used one of her most powerful techniques and cut all the remaining wolves into pieces. Rudius watched this in surprise and admired the strength of this girl because she did not leave a single chance for these wolves. The elf looked at our hero and smiled and said that after the curse of strength she could not return very quickly. Therefore, while she was only capable of this, our hero raised his finger up and inside, he thought that he was afraid to even think about what a full-force blow would be like. However, his thoughts were interrupted by a wolf who tried to attack our hero from behind. He looked in surprise at how many wolves were hiding in ambush and realized that he could not dodge these blows. He was already preparing to use the strengthening of his body, but the elf saved him by moving him to her. Now our heroes were both hanging in the air and rejoicing at how cool this feeling was. Rudius looked at the spirit and thanked the girl along with the elf. Ellie smiled and briefly answered that it seems that with these guys you can't let your guard down for a second. They looked down at the wolves, and the girl said that there were about 5 more wolves in the bushes and who knows how many more were hiding there. Rudius confidently said that in this case, it was time for his move. He used the echolocation skill he received from the bat. And immediately he received the full picture, he briefly answered the elf that there were about 30 of them here. And counting those that they had already finished off, they would reach the goal in no time. After that, he looked at his companion and ordered her to attack wherever he said. A second later, the girl made an air cut into the bushes which our hero pointed at. They continued to selectively kill wolves, and Rudius, meanwhile, thought that the accuracy of echolocation in the fresh air was much lower, and even the elf herself would not be able to accurately count how many of these wolves there were. But if they attacked them in the area, they would be able to drive the gray wolves to one place and then already strike your strongest blow. After a couple of minutes, the girl replied that she had done her part, and now it was our hero's turn. Rudius had already descended and was using his stealth skill to walk around the wolves. He used one of the skills he possessed and immediately paralyzed all the wolves in the area. He began to count them, and after a couple of minutes said that there were about 52 of them. The girl looked at the mountain of wolves and said that she couldn't even believe that they only met monsters in one day, to which our hero scratched his head and replied that they multiply quite quickly. After that, he looked at his friend and asked, "The girl who flies. This is her magic of spirits." The elf immediately smiled and said that she can borrow the power of spirits and cast their spells that exist in nature. She also added that such spirits are literally everywhere, although they don't appear often, but you pay for their power with your mana. So, without a significant supply of mana, nothing will come of it. Rudius looked up, and at the same time, one of the spirits sat on our hero's head, and the elf continued to say that how could he notice that this spirit was capable of creating the phenomenon of flight? The blindfolded spirit took our hero by the hair and said that she was sure that he had never seen such strong wind magic. After that, she pulled his hair, and our hero tried to drive her away, laughed and said that this spirit really loves to mock. After that, she called her friend over and said that it was already quite dark, so she wanted to return as soon as possible. The spirit nodded her head with a smile, and our heroes immediately found themselves in the air. The elf laughed and said that now they would fly back. Rudius flew for the first time and said that it was a real thrill. After that, he looked at his teammate with a happy face and asked, what other spirit magic could she use? The girl briefly answered that her specialization is water, ice, light, and earth, and the spirits of fire and darkness are not very suitable for her. The elf continued to say that if someone has low compatibility with a spirit, then a huge amount of mana will be spent on control. The girl also said that spirits can sometimes refuse to give their powers. While she was saying this, a spirit named Sylphide began to fly in front of our hero's face, and the elf noticed that this girl liked Rudius. However, immediately after this, the spirit took our hero by the ear and pulled hard. And Rudius immediately said that the elf was very mistaken. Suddenly, his happy face disappeared, and he became worried about what he saw in front of him. They flew towards the city and noticed that there was some kind of fire going on there. Rudius began to remember and talk about how there once was a village in that direction, but now it was all on fire. He used echolocation and felt that there was a rather strong monster standing there who single-handedly destroyed this entire settlement. Inside this village, there were several people who took the fight against this monster. They discussed that gray wolves should be the only monsters in this area, and now they have to fight some unpleasantly strong monster. The old man hid behind one of the adventurers and said that it was Baphomet. After that, the monster raised his finger up and a fiery weapon appeared in front of his hands. And immediately after that, it shot towards the people who were discussing it. The adventurer who defended the old man immediately raised his shield, but inside he understood that there was no way in his life he would be able to defend himself from this attack and prepared for his death. However, at the very last moment, someone saved these two using water magic. Baphomet and 2 people looked at the savior in surprise. It was our hero who had just used the water bullet skill. The spirit of water was in the air. An elf approached the adventurer and the old man and asked if they were okay or not, to which they briefly replied that they were okay thanks to this savior and the girl. The elf with a worried face said that they should deal with this monster and asked them to report the situation and tell everything they know. Meanwhile, our hero was already preparing to attack and used his eye to assess this monster. He saw that in fact this guy is not that strong, and he has level 27, but he has quite interesting skills. Rudius thought that this monster had a level significantly lower than the lizard man commander, but their stats were simply not comparable, and this meant that this was clearly not an ordinary monster. Baphomet looked at our hero and decided that he was dangerous. He called upon 4 fiery attacks at once to finish him off immediately. In his spells, he combined the basics of earth magic and the basics of fire magic to create fiery spears. Rudeus avoided these, and so with the thought that he himself can summon a little fire, but his fire is very weak and is completely unsuitable for battle. So if he wants to devour this goat, he will shoot fireballs like a crazy person. With these thoughts, he jumped up and attacked this monster. However, Baphomet raised his hand and blocked this blow. Our hero was surprised to discover that this monster has claws stronger than steel, which means that it is necessary to strengthen himself. However, immediately after this, the monster summoned several more fire spears, and then he attacked our hero, and a huge explosion occurred on the spot. Ellie looked worriedly at her friend who was now supposed to fight, but did not see him. However, as soon as they dispersed, she noticed that her teammate was safe and sound. Rudeus looked at Baphomet and thought that this guy has several fiery spears that he actively throws, but he always keeps 2 charges for defense, and this is clearly a difficult opponent. The elf approached our hero and said that she would be prudent at first to exchange information while they could not. She began to tell that it seemed that the villagers were still left here. Therefore, she asked those guys to organize an evacuation, and she also did not want to add destruction here, but she also added that she had everything. It will still not be possible to defeat this monster in one powerful magic hall. Rudeus looked at this creature with the thought that his friend's mana reserve must have already been depleted from the previous battle and flight. So you can't count on the magic of spirits and you need to come up with something yourself. However, while he was talking about this, the girl said that she would cover him from magic and he could calmly attack. Our hero was surprised at her and asked what she was talking about, and the girl asked her to just trust that it wouldn't happen. Rudeus briefly tossed his head and rushed to attack this monster head-on. Baphomet immediately used his fiery spears, but our hero did not even think about changing his trajectory and somehow evading them, because the girl told him that she would definitely protect him. He continued to run forward and was surrounded by water protection that the elf gave him. The fire spears could not penetrate this defense, and the water splashed around. And our hero thought that when magic of the same level collides, it seems that both charges are cancelled, and this can play into his hands. Rudeus continued to write to this monster, and he, noticing that his fire spears no longer worked, raised his hands up and called on a stronger spell. After that, he sent a huge mountain of debris towards our hero, but the girl told him not to continue adding speed and increased his speed with wind magic. This jerk was enough for him to jump up and, swinging his blade, tried to finish off this huge monster again. Baphomet raised his strong claws in defense, but Rudeus used the surge of Minotaur's powers. And at that very moment, several of Baphomet's fingers were cut off. The demon became enraged and tried to attack our hero with another hand, but he was immediately killed. It was Ellie who used exactly the same technique that he had used before in battle. After that, the girl looked at the monster with a smile and asked how his own light tasted to him. Those who were evacuated looked in surprise at this terrible explosion and asked themselves, did the adventurers really manage to defeat this creature? One of the fighters grabbed his shoulder and apologized, saying that if he had not been wounded, he could have helped these heroes. After that, an elf descended from the sky and thanked everyone for coping with the evacuation. One of the adventurers with happy eyes asked if the girl and her partner were okay, to which the girl raised her finger up and said that there was no monster now. The girl also began to talk about the fact that she dealt a fatal blow. But if this guy manages to call, he may attack again, so they need to be well prepared. The girl also looked at all the other residents and said that she had one request for them. The adventurer whom she saved immediately put her hand on her heart and said that they do absolutely anything. The girl smiled sweetly and asked if they had any food that they wanted to share with her. Meanwhile, our hero was sitting on the outskirts of the village in the forest and peacefully preparing Baphomet. Suddenly, his loneliness ended because the elf returned and said that there are very nice people in this village. Rudeus smiled and said that he was very glad to see this girl. After that, he asked how the villagers were feeling there, to which the elf replied that everyone had been successfully taken out and thanked the adventurers who were involved in this. The girl also said that she mentioned to the villagers that they still have to finish off this monster. Therefore, he has time for a corpse to arrive. Rudeus apologized for such inconvenience and thanked the girl for standing up for him. After that, he licked his lips and said that the monster looked quite tasty. And lifting the pan, he said that he had prepared an incredibly tasty soup from this demon. He started adding spices to it and rejoicing at how delicious it all looked. Finally, he swallowed one piece and said that this meat certainly stinks of lamb, but if you close your eyes to it, then this is a real delicacy. And meanwhile, the girl was sitting behind him and licking her lips because she couldn't taste this wonderful meat. The guy took out his token and saw that he now had new skills added, such as the basics of fire magic, the basics of earth magic, as well as the basics of mental enhancement, but rather weak, as well as the rest of the claws and mana replenishment. The elf looked at our hero and said that it all looked delicious, but when someone eats a person like a monster, she doesn't like it a little. Rudeus immediately took pictures around and realized that the girl was right, and besides, he was even more frightened by the fact that he got used to it so quickly. Several wild boars approached them at the smell of meat. Our hero immediately scanned them and found out that they had level 22 and their ability was offensive. The elf immediately stood up, saying that there were somehow too many monsters here. The guy stood up with a smile and said that since it came down to it, it was time for him to debut as a mage. However, as soon as he pointed his hand at these monsters, nothing happened, and he stood with a stupid expression on his face. Meanwhile, one of the boars began to run towards him and use his skill, called offensive, which consists in the fact that when moving in a straight line, the speed of the carrier increases sharply at a certain distance. And the boar, running past our heroes, scattered everything they had prepared and also knocked them to the ground. Ellie grabbed her staff tighter and said that she thought that now her team captain would conjure something. The girl looked at him again and said that her mana had run out, so she really couldn't do anything in this battle. Rudeus, meanwhile, looked at the overturned dish and said that he would never forgive these boars, because in order to get rid of the blood and sand, he killed a lot of time and wanted to enjoy the dish. So he worked on the taste very carefully. He became incredibly angry and shouted that the boars would answer for this with their flesh. After that, he raised his blade and began to run towards them, but the girl grabbed him by the clothes and asked him to calm down. The girl began to talk about the fact that the skill they use is offensive and it gives such significant acceleration force that everything in their path falls apart. Therefore, she thinks that it is better for them to break the distance or climb to where the attack will not reach them. Rudis nodded his head and they rushed at full speed to run away from those wild boars. They climbed some tree and were happy that they were finally able to break away from these monsters. The girl looked at her friend and asked in a whisper what kind of magic it was and why it didn't work. The guy scratched his nose and said that before this, he had never had to deal with the fact that his skills did not work, because until now, everything had worked perfectly. The elf raised her finger and said that she thought it would be wise to test this skill with an assessment first, and Rudius said that she was right. He opened his token and saw that those with this skill should instinctively understand how to use this magic. He looked at what was written here and said that he had to understand everything himself. The elf immediately said that if he could not use it, then it only meant one thing. The girl thought for a bit and added that this guy's brain was simply not capable of comprehending magic and he was unlucky. Rudius immediately said that this was simply cruel. The girl thought a little more and said that, however, he was still able to activate fire magic at a weak level. So her explanation does not give a clear understanding of why his magic still does not work. However, the girl suddenly had an epiphany. She said that it was possible. In order to use the monster's magic, he first needed to control their mana. The guy said that this is a good idea, and now he will try, and the girl continued to say that she does not know very much about monsters and their magic, but since he is able to absorb their power, he should definitely try it. Rudius extended his hand and closed his eyes, trying to fully concentrate and remember the feeling when he tasted monster meat for the first time. He remembered the flash of this power and decided that if he could recreate it in his body, then he would be able to handle magic perfectly. As soon as he opened his eyes, to his surprise, he noticed that in front of him there were 3 portals from which fiery spears should appear. After that, he raised his hand up and said that as long as he felt the energy of these monsters, he was able to control and use it as part of his body. After that, he pointed his finger down and the wild boars looked in surprise at how fire spears were now rushing towards them at great speed. As soon as they decided that it was time to run away, it was already too late and a powerful explosion was heard in the forest. And after another couple of hours, Rudius hummed songs under his breath and was glad that today he would have pork cutlets made from minced meat for dinner. He looked at his companion and apologized for making her wait, to which the girl replied that he did not worry about the whole finale to find out how important it was for him. But inside she thought that his Rashar was directly infuriating. The girl looked down and said, yes, such that in order to use magic he needs the monster's mana, and it's not unusual that it's not like just an attack took off at least some mana points for him. So he can cast magic continuously. Rudius agreed and told her that as soon as he felt the energy flowing through his body, he immediately understood how he should use all these skills. He also said that if the energy of monsters is equivalent to human energy, then this means that he can strengthen his body or weapons with its help. Among the adventurers, there are quite a few who develop magical power. but there are also those who use it in close combat. After all, the circulation of energy throughout the body allows you to increase its physical characteristics, and this also applies to weapons, because their damage increases noticeably if it is tempered with energy, and also if you go even further, you can make cuts through the air. The girl looked up and said that everything was clear to her now, and our hero had such a meager personal supply of energy that he could not use these skills. He said that this was true, but then added that now he has more than enough energy from monsters, but more importantly, he replenishes it simply by eating their flesh. At the same time, he put a pork cutlet into his mouth, and a new skill called Attack was immediately added to his backwater. The girl, meanwhile, looked at Rudius and summed up all his words to the fact that he extracts energy from food and is even able to store it in his body. And not only does he have such bonuses, but the cutlets he eats look simply unrealistically appetizing. Rudeus noticed her gaze and offered to try these cutlets, and the girl looked away saying that she would die if she ate them. And immediately after that, an explosion was heard behind them. Rudius and the elf looked in this direction in surprise, and they saw that a huge boar was standing there, looking at them with rage. Rudius immediately stood up and took his blade, saying that he would now kill the next boss. But as soon as he looked back, he saw that the elf was standing as if paralyzed, and a wild boar was rushing towards her at great speed. Rudius managed to take the girl in his arms and save her from this collision. As soon as the girl was safe, she began to think that she only managed to smell this monster from a distance, but he was already right in front of her and she does not understand how this could happen. After all, they are not even in a labyrinth, and there should not be such strong monsters here. Rudeus, meanwhile, was talking under his breath about how his food had been scattered again. He was furious and said that this boss clearly ran into problems when he did this. He continued to point his fingers at him, saying that this huge boar would go to the roast and this was the ideal plan. After that, he thought a little and said that there was clearly resistance to this scoundrel, and if you poured oil on it and set it on fire, then nothing would happen to him anyway. Therefore, he will obviously find another way to cook this idiot. After that, he used the assessment on the Boar King and found out that he has a 38th level. And of the unique skills, there is really nothing except offensive and fire resistance. Rudeus thought that his characteristics were quite high, but his skills included only laughter. So he fell to his knee and immediately used his earth magic skill. A huge fist burst out from their earth and immediately headed towards the Boar King. However, the Boar King used his offensive skill and immediately accelerated, pulverizing this stone fist into dust. Rudeus looked at this in surprise because he did not expect that this guy was so strong. And while he was thinking about this, the boar pinned him to his head with all his strength and threw him as far as possible. Rudius flew into a tree and lost consciousness, and the elf clearly did not want to fight the Boar King alone and asked him to get up as quickly as possible. However, our hero didn't even move and she called on her spirit to avoid this attack. She used the last of her mana to lift this huge carcass into the air. The girl was happy that she managed, with the help of the remnants of her energy, to hit the guy and stop him for a couple of seconds, but she immediately noticed that he didn't even have any skills, and he was just very durable and strong, and whether it was the magic of the earth or spirits they had, both are not powerful enough to penetrate this incredible creature. The elf had already said goodbye to her life, when suddenly she and the boar suddenly heard a heartbreaking scream. It was Rudius who came to his senses and used the Minotaur skill called Roar. He saw so many videos, began to doubt, and asked him not to look away. After all, they were clearly not finished yet. Rudeus looked his fear in the eyes and realized that it was unprofitable to use offense or impenetrability. And if he tried to introduce a battle of attrition, then the king of boars would simply switch to the elf. The Boar King had already come to his senses after this roar, and our hero began to think that it was a pity that he did not have a skill capable of finishing off this monster in one blow. However, he immediately decided that this was still not a hard fight, because this guy knows nothing more than to communicate forward at full speed. Rudius decided that the best option right now would be to use a skill that he had never demonstrated to anyone before. There were thoughts in his head that he would have to use it anyway, so it's no big deal. But in the meantime, the Boar King was already using the offensive and rushing at full speed towards our hero. However, Rudius didn't even move and was completely focused on the fact that firstly, he needed to direct his energy along his body, and imagine how he filled his blade with this energy. He felt that he had succeeded and opened his eyes, seeing the face of the king of boars in front of him. But at that very second, he waved his blade, and the body of the Boar King was cut into several parts. Rudius stood surprised and could not believe that he was able to do it the first time. The elf approached her friend and asked, Did he really just use energy to strengthen his weapon without any practice at all? Rudius raised his finger up and said that he knew that this was a great opportunity, so he added that the energy was successfully released and wanted to say something else. But he was interrupted by the crack of a sword. And while he was explaining everything he had just done, his sword crumbled into pieces. He sadly sat down next to him and began to talk about how this blade crushed many monsters and served him well. And the girl next to him said that it seemed that he simply could not withstand this energy that was poured into him, because a sword is like a part of the body for an adventurer, and it seems that this sword turned out to be too shocked. Rudius said that she was right, and added that it was time to finally finish the business for today. And what about this boar king? We should trim some meat from him too. Meanwhile, in the poisonous labyrinth on the 7th floor, there were acquaintances of our hero who continued to clear this place. Together, they were able to cope with the great poisonous rat. As soon as they finished, the magician walked up to her corpse and said that it was the highest level of the rat species called the Great Poison Rat, and it was clearly a difficult opponent. But the guys noticed with a smile that this did not turn out to be a big problem for their teamwork. After this, the adventurers laughed. They heard some noise and asked if something was wrong, and one of them began to leave, saying that he thought he heard something in the other room. They began to follow the sound and wondered where there could be a staircase in this place. And one of them said that perhaps it was a secret passage, so they needed to go and check what was inside. As soon as they went down these stairs, they saw that there was a purple chest right in the center of the room. They looked around it and were surprised to notice that it didn't even look like a trap, and immediately began to burn with impatience. What was inside, and what great treasures were waiting for them? The swordsman opened this chest and took out a strange-looking blade from it, saying that it looks quite powerful and he can directly feel the magical power pouring out of it, so it can probably be sold at a high price. The fat man looked at his friend and said that if he talks about magical power, then one cannot be completely sure that this blade is not cursed. But the magician went up to the fat man and patted him on the back, telling him not to be like that. The magician began to talk about how that weakling had not been seen for a long time, so they had to look for other ways to make easy money. And this was just a gift for all their efforts. For every deaf person, he said that this was probably the case. And the swordsman added that they had been hanging around here for the second night in a row, and let this really turn out to be a great gift that the goddess of luck had awarded them. The fat man thought a little and said that the weakling they were just talking about was not really missing, because he was sure that he saw this guy in the company of an incredibly beautiful elf. Everyone immediately laughed and said that despite the fact that this guy is weak, he is incredibly cocky, and decided that the next time they meet him, they will need to teach him a lesson so that he knows his place. After that, the swordsman and the magician left the room, and the fat man remained in it and looked at the chest, thinking that it was somehow strange that there were still undiscovered treasures on the 7th floor. And the fat man was right. It was clearly a cursed sword that quietly whispered to its owner about murder. Rudeus and the elf, meanwhile, returned to the city and discussed plans for a new sword. Our hero said that he wanted to consult with a familiar owner of a weapons shop. After that, they headed to a weapons shop called, and they approached the man who runs this shop. It was a dwarf named Inch. He looked at the blade that our hero brought and said that it could not be that the sword that he personally forged would crumble so easily, because even the brute physical force would not have brought it to such a deplorable state. After that, the dwarf looked at Rudius and asked, "What did this guy fill this sword with?" The girl asked her friend with a smile how he would get out of this situation, to which Rudius replied that he would explain everything now, because he had known this old man for a long time, and he was not one of those who spill other people's secrets. After that, they drank a couple of glasses of beer, and the old man said that eating monsters is an incredible ability that makes it possible to gain other people's powers, and it is not surprising that his abilities have skyrocketed lately. To this gnome, she asked, "Is he not at all surprised by such news?" The dwarf scratched his beard and said that if this guy is delicious, then what difference does it make what he eats? Now the most important thing is to find a sword that can withstand such a pressure of energy, and, based on what he knows, creating such a thing is not a quick task. Rudeus asked if such a blade needed any help, and the dwarf replied that high-quality magic stones would help. Our hero smiled and reached into his bag, saying that he just had a few with him. After that, he dumped 3 stones from the bosses onto the table. The dwarf recognized them as the Lizard Commander, Baphomet, and even the Minotaur. The dwarf sighed heavily and noticed that this guy's skills had really grown a lot. Rudeus smiled and held his head and said that the praise of this old man meant a lot to him, but the dwarf replied that if he needed anything else, he would definitely contact him. He also added that he was now going, and would probably forge the best sword in his life. After that, He went to the warehouse and came out of it with a sword in his hands, saying that while Rudius could use this blade as a replacement, our hero immediately thanked this dwarf. However, in the end, he warned again and said that this guy should under no circumstances vomit energy into this blade. After all, if he breaks this sword, he will obviously be in trouble and he is extorting exorbitant compensation for this sword. Rudius and his friend then headed to the pub, and the girl said that it was probably better for her to give up magical attacks for now until his new sword was ready. Rudius smiled and said that this dwarf is truly scary when it comes to weapons. The elf laughed and said that it was on business. And she also said that she was very glad to meet Rudius's friend for the first time in a long time. The guy immediately blushed and said that he was actually a loner. Our heroes continued to have fun, and suddenly the magician and his gang from the poisonous dungeon approached them, asking how they were spending their time. These guys didn't wait for an answer and said that they wanted to join them at the same table. The swordsman's hands began to shake, and meanwhile the girl got up from the table and said that if they have any problems they can solve them with a drink like real adventurers. After these words, the swordsman fell on the table with his face. His friends immediately began to come up to him and ask how he was feeling. And did he really manage to get drunk? However, his friends stopped laughing. They looked at the blade in his hands and asked why he hadn't sold it yet. Suddenly, the swordsman jumped up and with crazy eyes began to shout that he would kill everyone. He stood up and the first person he tried to kill was his friend the magician. The guy immediately appeared, and the fat man who stood behind him could not believe his eyes. After that, the madman turned around and swung his blade at the elf. But Rudius immediately jumped up and protected her with his blade. The guy looked into the eyes of the distraught adventurer and added that it seemed that drinking could not solve the problem. The rest of the adventurers also got mad and started asking this guy what the hell he was doing in their tavern. They tried to take his girlfriend to throw him out of here, but the guy resisted very strongly. And in a fit of rage, he swung his blade, instantly killing two men who tried to drive him out of here. The elf called the manager and apologized in advance for the fact that she was about to smash the wall. After that, she threw him out of this poor place with the help of one spell, and our heroes began to whisper what was going on with this guy. However, when the dust settled, they didn't notice that he stood up again and muttered that he was obliged to kill everyone. Rudius looked at his friend and asked if she was holding back, but the girl replied that the average adventurer should not be able to withstand even this. And this guy with a crazy face was already running towards Ellie. Rudius immediately rushed into battle and his partner said that if someone here has healing magic, then he should immediately start treating those who just suffered before it's too late. Rudius, meanwhile, got into a fight with this guy, and after assessing him, he learned that he was level 22, and his status was listed as insane. Rudius looked at this monster and thought that he had definitely become a berserker, because the swordsman he remembered did not have nearly such characteristics. Unexpectedly, the elf asked Rudius to move away because she wanted to use her spell at full power this time. However, the swordsman stood on his feet even against this. He covered himself with this demonic sword that was able to extinguish all this magic. After that, the girl shouted for Rudius to be careful because this guy has a cursed sword. Our hero said that this guy is only getting stronger and stronger by absorbing magic. Meanwhile, the swordsman began to look more and more like a monster and attacked our hero. Rudius was able to defend himself, but now it was clearly a problem for him. After all, this guy seemed to have gained a couple of tons in weight. They continued to fight and Rudius was able to get to this guy and hurt his leg. However, he immediately noticed that the tentacles were immediately covering his wounds. And if they tried to support him with magic, the sword would still suck it in again. Meanwhile, the elf, tucking her legs in, thought that if she wants to help her teammate, then she needs to time her strike and make a deceptive maneuver. Meanwhile, Fat Man came out and began to beg these people not to kill him. Thick, with tears in his eyes, said that he knew very well that they did not get along with Rudius. However, he added that for the pitiful him, who could only amuse himself with the fact that there is someone weaker than him, Magnus and Rondo were the only rays of light, so he begs for his life. Rudius said that he would try his best. He continued to fight and the girl said that she needed to try using a substitution, to which he told her not to interfere for now. Their fight is becoming more and more furious. And the guy thought that when he used the substitution on the elf, it only took 10 seconds. But the problem is that he cannot hold this crazy guy for so long while he tries to lift the curse. However, he decided that he could try to block access to the sword and immediately jumped on the hand of this monster. He pulled the sword and pressed it to the ground. After that, he chained this guy with the help of magic, and realized that if the reason for his status was a curse, then he could cleanse it as in the case with that girl, and then this guy would return to normal. After that, he screamed and used the substitution skill on this madman.